the alpha isn't the only opportunity to engage would be the other thing. So I think even if you apply but aren't selected, that doesn't mean you can't provide feedback. We'll be looking at other ways to engage.
Super. Next question, what does integration with issue management mean in practice? So I'm happy to take this one on. So essentially what we currently have as legacy is a one-way street. Your data is submitted data collection system, it's committed, and then our analysts work in the background to create queries in the issue management system. You then depart over to the issue management system, answer the queries in there, and then we then dive over to the data collection system to progress. In data futures, what you have is a two-way street. So you have rules and you have quality issues that are raised in the HDP. They're then created in issue management, and then once you actually answer them in issue management, then they're approved and it cycles back to the HDP. So we want to test the sort of full integration between those two systems. And obviously this is slightly different than what we currently do in legacy. So we want to have this as a high importance area, just to make sure that firstly providers understand what the process is and how each of the systems integrate and relate to each other, but also that the functionality fully works as well. Don't know if any others had anything else to feedback on that.
I think you covered it really, Charlie. And the quality assurance approach is one of the biggest changes with data futures. So we really are moving away from quite a manual approach that we've got at the moment into something much more automated. That means that our systems are more joined together. It's not, you've got lots of different browsers open and you've got to manually navigate between the two. So that is one of the key areas that we want to test early on to make sure that the user experience there works for providers and for statutory customers and for HESA users as well.
How many alpha pilots are you looking for? What's the magic number?
So I'm assuming the participants, we're kind of looking about the sort of 15 mark, but that's not to say if we have depending on the sort of spread that we get, actually, we may want to go up or down, but we're looking around the sort of 15 mark.
Brilliant. Will the test files you give us be based on how we as a provider provide education, for example, PGT and PGR only? I think there's concerns about providing someone an undergraduate test file if they only do PGT study.
I'm happy to pick up on that one when silent. Oh, go Hannah.
No, so the response is probably similar to that that Charlie gave with regards to kind of different nations and providers coming from different nations. Yeah, we'll be providing test files that will be kind of relevant to various different forms of provision to ensure that providers that are primarily providing that provision can submit successfully. So yeah, we will be tailoring because we do want to kind of test robustly the entire system and ensure that various different forms of provision can be returned. So we will be kind of curating and tailoring those to the selected, and then that obviously ties in with the criterion that Emily's covered with regards to who we would select. We would ensure that we are selecting pilots, as you referred to, but testing providers to ensure that we have a full coverage of that provision.
Just to pick up on that again, so we won't necessarily be handcrafting files for individual participants, because one of the things that we really need to make sure that we've got is full coverage and that we're hitting the right tests as we go through. So while we want to make sure there's full coverage of the models, that doesn't necessarily mean that it would be tailored to particular providers. So if, for instance, you are a provider that only has postgraduate provision, we wouldn't necessarily give you just test files that only have postgraduate provision, because we need to make sure that you hit all the different parts of the system, because we need to make sure we've got comprehensive coverage for the testing. But that's not to say that you couldn't then enhance those files, or when we get into the phase where you're using real data, obviously tailor that down to the type of provision that you have. So I think it's going to be quite a mixed approach, but we can work with you on that to make sure that the test cases are relevant.
So the next question, so would it be expected for a provider to engage throughout the whole alpha phase, or could they engage only in the first phase, for example, just using test data?
So if anyone's got preference on who goes, but no, I think in terms of the sort of the first phase using test data, it's absolutely fine. There is no, you don't have to use live data if you don't want to. If we get to that second phase, ideally we would want somebody that's able to to join throughout that sort of 10-day, for those sort of 10 days between May and August. But again, it doesn't mean to say that you have to be using live data. We can certainly, there's still lots of tests that can be done using test data, and it's still really valuable for us to get that feedback. So it wouldn't preclude you from that at all.
Thank you. Next question. How many hours or weeks do you envisage an institution will need to commit to this? So obviously we've got the sort of the 10 days expected participation, but I suppose it's a good question in terms of, you know, when are we able to do these tests, and are we requiring participants to commit some live time, or can participants just work on in the background?
Happy to jump in if you like. It's always hard to work out who's going to speak. I think it's going to be a bit of a mixture. So a lot of the approach that Emily described, we want it to obviously be sort of moderated testing for some parts of it, which would mean finding a time. So it's a lot of that is one-on-one. So you'll have a HESA person with you as you go through sort of tests that we want you to run through. So we'll be looking to arrange slots obviously that are convenient. So we would anticipate those being probably half-day chunks. And then obviously Emily outlined that we want to do some workshops as well. Those are probably going to be a mixture of sort of one-on-one and small group exercises. So again, we'll be looking to schedule those in, but we wouldn't anticipate them being more than sort of 2.5 hours long at a stretch. So what I would hope is once we've got down our list of participants, we can come up with a schedule to slot those in and find sessions and times that are workable for people. We are very mindful, obviously, that as we get closer to the summer, you'll have other things HESA related that will be become more pressing. So we'll try and make sure that that schedule is workable for everyone and that there's scope to have some flexibility in there. But we would expect most of it to be structured time, and then anything else that you can do around that would be an absolute bonus as far as we're concerned. It'd be wonderful if you can, but there's no expectation.
Next question. We are a small alternative provider using an access database for student data. Would our interaction be helpful during May-August period? So I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, absolutely. Your interaction would be very beneficial to us. Obviously, we're conscious that the sector is very varied. We have all sorts of institutions of from small to large, all different types of provisions. So we absolutely want to be able to cater for your small provision and using an access database for doing your returns. So yeah, absolutely. We would love to have a provider of your type within the alpha pilot, because you know you're part of our audience and our customer base. So we want to be able to make sure that the system caters for your requirements and needs too. Next question. Do the 10 days include workshops and also our time for testing, or is the testing additional days? So I think we've sort of part answered that one, I think, haven't we, Alice?
Yeah, so the 10 days would cover everything we expect, so everything that we're setting up for you and scheduling, but not anything else that you want to do in terms of your own exploratory analysis.
Next question. Who will the real student data be shared with outside of HESA?
That's a tough one. So during the first phase, we will absolutely be running test deliveries to our statutory customers. So one of the things that obviously we need to make sure is that once we've collected all your data in, we can actually share it with the people who need to see it. So we will be doing that with test data. Obviously, there will be lots of caveats around this is test data. You can't draw any conclusions from it. Obviously, it'll be a very small data set anyway. So there will be limitations around how they can use that. I don't think we've really agreed whether we'll continue that into the second phase. I don't think we would need to. If we do need to, that will obviously be covered by agreements to make sure that that data cannot be used for anything. But my suspicion would be that we wouldn't deliver that data to anyone outside of HESA.
Brilliant. Is being part of the alpha a prerequisite to the beta? No, so I don't think it is. So anyone who's an alpha participant doesn't mean that you won't be allowed to participate in beta or vice versa, really. So yeah, it won't have an impact on participants for the beta project.
No, I think what we would hope is that those of you that are able to be involved in alpha, that you would probably want to be involved in beta as well. So we probably would not make an assumption that you would want to be involved, but that's not to say that if your circumstances change, that again you can't be involved, that if you can't be involved, you'd have to be. And again, beta, we'll be looking for a much wider range of numbers. We're looking for sort of around the 100 mark, so actually for beta, so we're looking for a much wider group. So hopefully, essentially, if you apply for it, most of you should hopefully get in, unless everyone's feeling very keen for beta.
Next question. I'm keen to see what data quality tools will be available to providers. To start with, when do you think data supply outputs will be available? So I know we're kicking off with quality rules and credibility reports to begin with at the start of the project. So when do we anticipate data supply being available?
I'm just going to have a quick look at our roadmap, see if I can find the exact dates, but I think that's
I'm not
something
entirely sure whether it's for alpha data supply.
If it is the second phase of alpha, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure, but even if it isn't functionally there, I think we would want to talk through our approach to that with you. Obviously, providers use data supply in lots of different ways. The structure that we're proposing for the Data Futures version of data supply is quite different to what you get in our current collections. And obviously, we're aware that that would have implications for how you use the data, how you join it together, and all the things that you need to do with it. So even if we can't give you an actual file for early on in alpha, we'd want to talk that through with you and get feedback on that, particularly ahead of beta, because I think to make beta work, we absolutely need that to be fully functional.
So next question. So I suspect there'll be more requests to participate in the alpha than you can accommodate. How will those who aren't in the pilot be made aware of progress to date and outcomes findings? So we've got a specific area of the website now for the alpha phase of the project. So we're certainly hoping to share an awful lot of the findings and the outcomes and the feedback on that particular section, because although the alpha participants are sort of our guinea pigs, we obviously want to bring everyone along for the journey as well. So we absolutely don't want all the knowledge and feedback and concerns and questions to be entirely just for that population. So although they're going to be testing it, we certainly want to share that out to the whole of the sector, just so we sort of bring everyone along with this phase of the project. Right, let me just find the next one. Sorry, we've had a few questions. Sorry if I missed this. Are there any new data sharing requirements that we need to sign up to? So data sharing, I'm not too sure, but we'll certainly have contracts drawn for alpha participants, and presumably the contracts will contain things about data sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. They are being drafted at the moment. We're using the ones that but essentially we're just redrafting the ones that we had used previously. So essentially they unfortunately are quite lengthy, because the contracts always are, but they do sort of make out the kind of what the requisites are and what the do's and don'ts are, with obviously the sort of first phase not putting any live data in the system and those sorts of things, and then second phase they're able to, and making sure any of the kind of sharing of where that data is going, that will all absolutely be included within those contracts that are signed, that need to be signed before access to the system.
Next question. Oh, sorry.
There is just on the back of that, there is a similar question that might be most suited to this bit. I'll just find it. Just because you've made reference to the previous agreement. Oh gosh. Oh, I'll try and find it if you want to continue, Charlie, and then you can always come back to it.
Yeah. So the next question. So you will be looking for a number of providers from each area. Yeah. So I think we've addressed that in a previous question. So we're aiming to achieve a full representation of the sector, which includes provision, geographical regions, regulators. So we're hoping, obviously, we've got 15. We're aiming sort of 15 participants. So hopefully through the 15 we'll be able to sort of cover most areas. Obviously it won't be entirely representative of the sector, because it is very broad, but we certainly hope to do our best in that.
I have just found this question, so I don't know if I want to cover it now, because it's just with regards to the legal requirements. So somebody's asked, last time around the legal arrangements were prohibitive to us taking part. because when uploading real data, HESA took no responsibility for any data breaches on the new platform during testing. Do you know if the legal agreements are the same as last time round?
I don't think they're certainly not exactly the same. They are certainly being sort of, that we're using it as a basis to redraft from. So I can certainly, I know that was a concern that had come in previously. I know we've certainly talked about it. I don't know if I've got an exact response to that right now, so I can certainly take that one away and sort of make sure that actually that's being considered as part of the redrafting. I don't know if Annette, I know you've been slightly more heavily involved in contracts than I have. If you've got anything else to add?
Yeah, I don't have a definitive answer on that. We will certainly discuss that internally.
Next question. So if we find out we've completely misunderstood the guidance on an area, will we have access to support to gain greater understanding, for example, the many different IDs? And what if we can't fix those in time? So yeah, absolutely, you will have access to support. We want to try and create a Teams page where we sort of share our tests, and also that'll be an area where you can have access to support. So fully expect myself and Hannah, who's been working on the guidance, to be part of that Teams group. So we'll certainly assist in any way that we can. And obviously you've always got the liaison channel as well. If you did have any questions, either specific to Alpha or also outside the borders of Alpha as well. And we'll certainly do our best to either answer your question or implement guidance to support some of your confusions in that area. Like we said earlier, obviously we're part of the Alpha is testing the functionality and the technical development of the system, but also to have a look at the specification and the guidance, just to make sure it's all watertight and there's full understanding there. So that's an area we're really keen to tidy up and to make sure that it's all accurate and really easy to understand. Next question. So do we definitely have to be employed in the HE to work as a tester?
So to participate in the Alpha pilot, we would expect it to be HESA subscribing organisations. We will be doing obviously parallel testing with statutory customers and also with software suppliers, so that they can do what they need to do in terms of the testing, and there'll be opportunities to bring those groups together, but I think we are restricting it to just those 3 groups.
So the next question is, if using real student data for testing outside of a live collection, presumably this could be anonymised in some way to cover any data protection issues.
Absolutely, yes. So in submitting it, you can anonymise it or pseudonymise it, and we could do the same in terms of exporting it and sending it on.
Next question: will we be able to test will we be able to test multiple different files, i.e. testing different engagements, or will we be working off just one file? So I'm happy to, yeah, oh yeah, go on Alice, yeah, absolutely.
So yes, absolutely, there'll be opportunity to test lots of different files. I think we anticipate giving you a handful of files to cover different test scenarios. You can then obviously do whatever you want to do with those to continue your own testing or provide your own as well. So there is absolutely, it's not a one-hit wonder. We're expecting you to have lots of opportunities to send lots of different things through.
Next question, is it safe to assume that the Alpha real student data will not link to the actual annual return, i.e. not throw queries for the actual return resulting from Alpha data? Yeah, absolutely not. That'd be very mean of us, wouldn't we, if we allowed you into Alpha and then we started raising queries on your annual return off the back of it. So yeah, I think that'd be very unfair. So I certainly hope not. Will there be any difference between APs and HEs in data futures? No, there won't. So we've obviously got different categories of providers. You've got your Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and we've also got England approved and England approved fee cap. And that's certainly an area which we want to certainly build on with the OFS in working out sort of coverage statements for England approved and England approved fee cap. Because obviously we've got that current split between, well, the easy split between the 2 collections at the moment. So obviously as we're amalgamating into one big collection, we need to sort of work on what the coverage statements are and what the requirements from the OFS are in that particular category. But no, there's not too much difference between APs and HEs now we've got the new categories. Next question, what level of senior sign-off will be required on the participation agreement?
So I think in terms of the agreement, there does need to be someone that's got sort of legal power, I suppose. So whether that is your accountable officer or a director or legal representative that's able to sign that off from a on your organisation's behalf. I don't think we've necessarily precluded. I would need to go and double check that, having not looked at the contract for a little while, whether it is any more detail. So I can certainly follow up on if I've got anything further to add on that, and as part of the questions when they go out.
Next question, for Alpha participants, will access to systems, sessions, etc. be available to multiple staff at the participating institution, or would you expect it to all flow through one individual? So I think we're expecting for multiple individuals. Yeah, okay, we've got nods. Okay, brilliant. I can take this one on. So obviously we've got it'll all be run through Alpha IDS instances, and also part of the testing on IDS is just to make sure that people have the right access to the areas that we want. So obviously if it all just flowed through one person, they'd be expected to have every single role, so they should expect to see everything. But if you have a hierarchy of roles within one organisation submitting to Alpha, then we can obviously test that area of the system. So yeah, absolutely, you'll have multiple instances, so you can have multiple people working on Alpha within an institution. What happens if the pilot demonstrates the need for systemic or significant change? Good question.
Who wants to go for it? Go on, Alison.
I mean, obviously we expect there to be feedback. Part of the reason we want to do an Alpha pilot is to catch that stuff early enough. Obviously we did quite an extensive period of requirements gathering, and some of those requirements are published on our website. So hopefully that reflects and does resonate with you all in terms of what we're trying to deliver. But obviously, there are multiple ways to skin a cat. You can try and meet a requirement in lots of different ways, and the purpose of the Alpha pilot is to make sure that actually the way we've interpreted that requirement works. So that's the main part of this. Obviously, as part of the Alpha pilot, we'll be triaging that feedback and we'll be re-evaluating our roadmap. But also, as part of Alpha, we're not just looking at what we have developed, we're looking at what we plan to develop, so that we can try and head some of those issues off at the past. So I think we would really hope, obviously, that there's not going to be anything fundamental that just doesn't work. I think we've done an awful lot of work with the previous Alpha group, with our statutory customers, with user groups, to try and pick up some of these issues. So I'd hope there isn't anything fundamental, but the main thing will be getting that feedback early and trying to run the pilot in a way that means that we can really understand the feedback as it comes in.
And I suppose also, just to follow up on that, we'll be sort of throwing files into the system as well before Alpha participants are asked to join. So hopefully we can sort of iron out some bugs that might come out of the system at an early stage. So hopefully when Alpha participants are allowed in, it should be tested, just to make sure that there's no significant things that break for that. Another question, so when using real student data, how many records would you expect to be returned, or do you expect all records to be returned? This relates to alpha and beta testing. So if we're using the data entry tool, we might not be able to return all records, maybe just a few just records for testing. So there's no expectancy on the amount of data that you throw in for your real test files. We absolutely want you to be able to return as many as you can, but there's certainly no sort of minimum amount needed. So just whatever you can achieve is more than enough, because we'll have different providers able to achieve different levels of number of records. So whatever you can participate, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, is that we have done obviously internal stress testing to put sort of loads of data through the system. So we've done sort of that side of it internally. Obviously, once we get to beta, we would not necessarily expect every student you've ever had to be put into the system, but we would expect that once we get to beta would be a much more an even further robust test to say that actually we would put larger scale data through. But appreciate for alpha through the data entry tool, there's no way you're going to start putting hundreds or thousands of students through that unless you want to spend every waking minute doing
that. So we've probably got time for a few more questions before we sort of hand off. So the next question is, so what opportunities are there for engagement with the sector as a whole during the alpha pilot? So obviously we mentioned we'll have the dedicated alpha space on the web page where we'll be sharing feedback and tests and queries or bugs that might come out of the system, but also we've got the e-learning suite as well. So we're continuously producing content as e-learning on different areas of the specification and data model. So we'll be continuing to release those out to the sector to engage with. I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, probably just to say that any events that are still happening, I appreciate obviously they're very different at the moment, but obviously we've got Virtual Shrock next week, we are attending there. We have monthly workshops with our software suppliers, we still have our provider forum group, so we are still kind of going out and speaking to people. So certainly, and we would be more than happy to come to any events that anyone is organising, whether they, so obviously we'll need to be a bit more selective, and it's much easier now that we can join them remotely. But yeah, certainly please do anything you want us to be able to provide updates on. We will do our best to try and accommodate where possible, being involved in any of those.
So next question.
Sorry,
sorry.
Charlie, I think the next question that you're going to ask, we've just got two that are very similar.
Okay.
So one about I can read them out. So the first is, can we access HESIS alpha systems from any computer, or will alpha access be restricted to a specific IP address, for instance, thus indicating we have to use the same network, computer, laptop each time we engage? And then the second question, which is very similar, will access permissions be specific to alpha? We may need our tech team to have access to the HTTP, but they shouldn't have access to the current student platform data. So as Charlie's indicated, we will be using the existing identity system, and we'll be setting up specific alpha kind of testing roles, which will be allocated to individuals within the provider. So in regards to the first, it doesn't have to be accessed from the same IP address, just as long as you've got access to that identity system. The roles will be associated, and the instances within the HTTP will be associated to those roles. So once they're allocated, you can access it from a variety of different workspaces. And then the second element of that, with regards to granting those roles to people that don't currently have access to any of the identity roles, these are standalone roles and work in a similar way to current collections, in that they're specific to each of the records. Therefore, the roles will be specific to alpha. So if you want to allocate these to somebody who doesn't currently have any access to any of these systems, that's not a problem. There won't be any kind of crossover between live collections and the alpha pilot. It's very much an isolated instance.
I think the other part to add on that is that depending on what it is that you would need that those teams to be able to work on, is just to make sure that actually we have that covered within the agreements as well, of any agreements that are signed, just to make sure that we don't get to any position where we can't provide the access that's needed. As Hannah said, there is no issue from a sort of technical point of view. It's just making sure that from a legality point of view that we've got that all covered.
I think we've actually got one more question in. That's actually really convenient. So the final question of today's session. So will standard outputs be available for the alpha? And for example, will all derived fields be available?
Who wants to answer?
I can if you like.
Nice.
So we won't have all the derived fields available in alpha. There's obviously a lot of them are still under development, so there will be a significant number of them in there that we can use to test. And one of the things that we're really keen to do is understand more about how you engage with the derived fields, what you need from the specifications, whether we're presenting them in a format that's understandable. And then obviously once the equivalent to data supply is there, that will be, obviously it will include those derived fields, the sort of enriched data, so that you can have a go with that. And we'll be making use of the derived fields as part of our quality rules and credibility reports that will be visible in the alpha environment for you as well. So there absolutely will be an opportunity to engage, but it won't be a comprehensive list. We're still working on those. By the time we get to beta, that's more of a dry run, so we would expect to have that pretty comprehensive by that point. But certainly some of the areas of the specification that have changed most significantly and the derivations that have changed most significantly, we would want to road test with you during the alpha pilot.
So I think that was the last question, and we've now come to 11 o'clock. Obviously, if anyone has got any other sort of follow-up questions whilst you kind of are in a position to be able to have a chance to actually digest all the information that we've provided, feel free to come back to liaison and we'll do our best to answer those. We will be putting a recording of this session onto the Alpha web pages of the website. It should be up there within a couple of days. I would like to say today, but that might not be realistic. So, but we'll just do our best to try and get that there as soon as possible. And again, any follow-up questions, we'll do our best to answer. But thank you very much for all your time. I've certainly found it really useful to understand some of the questions that have come in, and hopefully that's been helpful, and hopefully we might have encouraged a few of you to want to come and get involved. That would be really, really great from our perspective. So yeah, just a big thank you very much.
We've got a lot of thank yous coming in. Thank you.
Sorry, Hannah.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, Emily, off the back of what you've said, yeah, somebody has explicitly asked that any questions that you have submitted during this session that we haven't addressed, we will also be, we are noting those. We've just kind of grouped together and prioritised just with regards to the time constraint this morning. So yeah, feel rest assured, if you have asked a question that hasn't been answered, we will endeavour to respond directly to that question.
Yeah, that was exactly my point as well. We're sort of grouping together all the ones just very specific to the Alpha project. So we wanted to obviously address those first, and consequently we sort of ran out of time right at 11 o'clock. So yeah, absolutely, we will endeavour to answer all questions submitted.
Yeah, we'll do our best, and we'll if they're obviously specific to Alpha, we'll put them on our Alpha page, and also any follow-up questions as well, just because I think again it will be useful for everyone to have copies of those, and then we'll look at the others if they're not specific to Alpha exactly where we put them on the website, but we'll make sure